I couldn't tell whose blood stained my white blouse when I burst through the gallery's back entrance into the rain-soaked night. The art exhibition had been flawless 2 hours earlier. Soft jazz, Prosecco fountains, collectors in Armani discussing 7-figure sculptures. I'd been hired to manage the coat check, one of 15 temporary staff brought in by the event company. My rent was 3 weeks overdue, and they'd promised cash at the end of the night. Then the screams started. I'd been organizing tickets in the small alcove near the entrance when the first crash echoed through the marble halls. Not gunfire, but something breaking, expensive, and irreplaceable. Shouting followed, then genuine terror in voices that minutes before had been discussing the impressionist movement over canapés. A security guard had grabbed my shoulder, his face drained of color. Back exit, now. We'd run through employee corridors I hadn't known existed, past storage rooms crammed with crated artwork, down concrete stairs that smelled like mildew and old paint. He'd pushed open a fire door, and we'd stumbled into an alley behind the building. That's when I'd lost him in the confusion. One moment he was pulling me left toward the main street, the next he'd vanished into a crowd of panicked staff and guests fleeing in every direction. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer but not close enough. I'd run the opposite way. Now I stood 3 blocks away in an industrial area I didn't recognize, pressed against the wet brick of a warehouse, gasping for air. My phone showed no signal. The building must be blocking it. My feet ached in the required black heels. The white blouse and black pencil skirt that had seemed so professional this morning now clung to me, soaked through, streaked with something dark I desperately wanted to believe was wine. I needed to move, find a main street, call someone, but my legs felt like concrete. That's when I heard the voices, deep, controlled, speaking in what sounded like Russian. I'd taken 2 years of it in college, enough to recognize the language if not the words. But the tone needed no translation, cold, final, punctuated by a sound that made my blood freeze. A man pleading. I should have run. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to move away from that sound, to not know, to not see. But I'd turned the corner into the alley too fast, momentum carrying me forward before my brain could override my feet. The scene burned itself into my memory, in the space of a heartbeat. 6 men in the loading area of what looked like an abandoned factory. 5 standing, one on his knees with his hands zip-tied behind his back, face already swollen and bleeding. And 1 man standing apart from the others, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command absolute attention. He was taller than the others, lean but powerfully built, wearing dark clothes that somehow looked expensive despite being soaked from the rain. Black hair pushed back from a face all sharp planes and harder edges. Even from 30 feet away, even in the inadequate light from a single overhead bulb, I could feel the authority radiating from him like heat. He said something in Russian, his voice barely above a conversational tone. The kneeling man began sobbing, words tumbling out in a desperate rush. The tall man shook his head slowly, almost regretfully. He nodded once. The man to his left raised a gun with a silencer attached and fired. The sound was quieter than I'd expected, a muffled crack rather than the explosion I'd heard in movies. The kneeling man crumpled sideways onto the wet concrete. I couldn't stop the gasp that tore from my throat. 7 pairs of eyes snapped toward my hiding place behind a rusted dumpster. I ran. Behind me, rapid Russian, commands, not questions. Footsteps pounding against pavement, splashing through puddles, gaining on me despite my terror-fueled sprint. I kicked off my heels and ran harder, my stockinged feet slipping on the rain-slick ground. Left turn, right turn, no plan, no direction, just away from what I'd seen. An arm caught me around the waist, lifting me off my feet. I screamed, thrashing wildly. "Tikha." The word was growled against my ear. Be quiet. The man holding me was built like a boulder, broad, solid, with a shaved head and a scar running from his temple to his jaw. He set me on my feet, but didn't release his grip, one massive hand locked around my upper arm. "Please," I managed, my voice breaking. Please, I didn't see anything. I was lost. I'll forget everything. I swear I'll never. Bring her. The voice came from behind my captor, and my heart stopped. The tall man from the loading dock walked into the alley with his hands in his pockets, his expression utterly calm. Up close, he was even more striking, late 30s maybe, with dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance and a mouth set in a line that suggested smiling was a foreign concept. He studied me, the way someone might examine an unexpected complication in an otherwise straightforward plan. She saw, the man holding me said in heavily accented English. Yes, I gathered that. The boss's English was perfect, his accent barely noticeable, which somehow made him more frightening. He took 2 steps closer, rain dripping from his hair onto his collar. Who are you? My mouth opened. Nothing emerged. Your name, he said with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Sophie, it came out as a whisper. Sophie Bennett, I'm a student. I was working at the gallery tonight. I got turned around. I didn't mean to come here. I promise I won't say anything to anyone. A student. Something flickered across his face, not quite amusement, but close. Of course you are. He pulled a phone from his pocket, pressed a single button, and spoke rapid Russian into it. Then he looked at me again, those dark eyes missing nothing. Do you have family in the city? I shook my head. I share an apartment, 3 roommates. They'll notice I'm missing. People will look for me. No one saw you leave the gallery, he said quietly. In that chaos, you're just another face who ran. Tell me, Sophie Bennett. He said my name like he was filing it away for later use. Do you have somewhere urgent to be tonight? The question was so absurd I almost laughed, except nothing about this situation warranted laughter. I want to go home, I said, adding the tremor in my voice. He studied me for another long moment, rain running down both our faces, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded to the man holding me. Put her in the car. No, wait. You have 2 options, the boss said, his voice still that terrible, patient calm. Come with me while I decide what to do with you, or I solve this problem here and now. He didn't touch the gun I could now see holstered under his jacket. He didn't need to. Which would you prefer? Tears mixed with rain on my face. Please. He sighed, a soft sound of annoyance, and gestured again. The car! Victor, don't let her fall. She's not wearing shoes. Victor, the man who still held my arm, holstered his weapon and guided me toward a black Mercedes idling at the end of the alley, its engine running, windows tinted so dark they looked like sheets of obsidian. He wasn't rough, exactly, but his grip left no room for argument. I looked back once. The boss was following, still on his phone, still speaking Russian. His eyes met mine for just a second, and I saw no mercy there, only calculation. Victor opened the rear door and helped me inside, not gently, but not violently either, as if I were a package requiring careful but impersonal handling. The leather seats were cold against my bare legs. The door closed with an expensive, final sound. Through the tinted window, I watched the boss end his call and slide into the front passenger seat. He didn't look back at me. Drive, he said in English. The Mercedes pulled smoothly away from the alley, away from the dead man in the loading dock, away from my normal life of overdue rent and evening classes and coat-check jobs that paid in cash. I pressed myself into the corner of the seat, pulling my knees to my chest, and tried not to think about what happened to witnesses in Mafia films. Tried not to remember the sound that body had made hitting the concrete. Tried not to notice the way the boss's shoulders filled his jacket, or the absolute authority in his voice, or the fact that I was completely, utterly at his mercy. The city lights blurred past the windows as we drove into areas I'd never seen before, away from the university district, away from downtown, into neighborhoods where the houses sat behind walls and gates. I had no idea where we were going. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The estate materialized through iron gates that opened automatically as we approached. I'd stopped shaking somewhere during the 30-minute drive, not because fear had subsided, but because my body seemed to have exhausted its physical responses to terror. Now, I just felt hollow, watching through the rain-streaked window as we swept up a curved driveway toward a house that belonged in a European architectural magazine. Modern but classic, all clean lines and warm stone, 3 stories of floor-to-ceiling windows glowing against the night sky. Manicured lawns stretched into darkness on either side, punctuated by sculptures that probably cost more than my entire education. Beautiful. A cage was still a cage, no matter how gilded. The car stopped beneath a covered portico. Victor opened my door and waited. When I didn't move immediately, he reached in and took my arm again, drawing me out onto smooth flagstone that felt shockingly warm against my bare, frozen feet. "Heated," Victor said, noticing my reaction. "Boss doesn't like ice." The front door opened before we reached it, warm light spilling across the steps. A woman appeared in the doorway, 60s, maybe, with steel-gray hair pulled into an elegant chignon, wearing slacks and a cashmere sweater that screamed understated wealth. Her eyes widened when she saw me. She breathed. My God. "Irina," the boss said, brushing past her into a foyer dominated by a chandelier that could have doubled as modern art. "Guest room, east wing. Get her dry clothes, something warm to eat if she'll take it." He paused, turning to look at the woman. "And Irina, lock the door." My stomach dropped to my feet. Irina's expression softened with what might have been sympathy, but she nodded. "Come, I didn't have a choice. Victor released me into Irina's care, and she led me through the foyer, all white marble and recessed lighting, up a floating staircase that seemed to defy physics, down a hallway lined with doors and abstract art I was too terrified to appreciate. She opened a door near the end of the hall. The room beyond was larger than the entire apartment I shared with 3 roommates. A king bed with gray silk bedding, a sitting area with a white leather sofa and chairs, windows that I knew without checking would be locked or alarmed or both, a door that certainly led to a bathroom nicer than any I'd ever used. Beautiful, a prison. "Sit," Irina said gently, guiding me toward the bed. "Let me see your feet." I sat because standing required more energy than I possessed. Irina disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a warm, wet towel. She knelt before me, this elegant woman in expensive cashmere, kneeling on the floor, and carefully cleaned my feet, wiping away grime and small cuts I hadn't felt through the adrenaline. "You were at the gallery," she said quietly, not quite a question. "I saw the news. Vandalism, they said. 3 paintings destroyed." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "And you saw something else, something you shouldn't have." Another nod. She sighed and stood, taking the soiled towel with her. "I'll bring clothes, something warm. Don't try the windows, they're wired. Don't try the door after I leave. And child," she looked at me with genuine concern, "don't antagonize Mikkel. He's not cruel by nature, but he has no patience for complications." "What's he going to do to me?" My voice cracked on the question. Irina's expression was answer enough. She didn't know either. "Rest," she said. "Someone will bring food." She left, the lock engaged with a soft but definite click. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands, still trembling despite the warmth of the room. Food arrived 20 minutes later, not Irina, but a younger woman with dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail and eyes that assessed me with cool professionalism. She carried a tray bearing soup that smelled of herbs and cream, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and tea in a delicate porcelain cup. "I'm Katia," she said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "Irina asked me to bring this. You should eat. You look like you're about to pass out." She wasn't wrong. The adrenaline had fully drained now, leaving me hollow and shaky. "Thank you," I managed. Katia studied me for a moment longer, something like curiosity in her expression. "You're the first one he's brought here who wasn't expected." Before I could ask what that meant, she was gone. The lock clicked again. I forced myself to eat, not because hunger existed anywhere in my current emotional landscape, but because some practical corner of my brain insisted I'd need strength. For what, I couldn't say. Escaping seemed impossible, but waiting passively for whatever came next felt worse. The clothes arrived an hour later. Irina this time, carrying pajamas in soft dove-gray cotton, a matching robe, and slippers lined with something that felt like clouds. Everything was in my size, which meant someone had noticed, had assessed, had reported back. "Bathroom is through there," Irina said, nodding toward the door I'd spotted earlier. "Towels, toiletries, everything you need. If you require anything else, there's a phone by the bed. Press 1. To call whom?" She smiled slightly. "Whoever answers." Then she was gone too, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the distant sound of rain against the windows. I took the longest shower of my life, standing under water hot enough to turn my skin pink, trying to wash away the feeling of this night. The bathroom was all white marble and brushed gold fixtures, stocked with products whose names I recognized from magazine advertisements I could never afford. I used them liberally, scrubbing my hair until my scalp tingled, my skin until it felt raw, as if I could somehow erase the memory of gunshots and blood and those calculating dark eyes. When I finally emerged, wrapped in the impossibly soft robe, I found the dinner tray had been cleared while I was occupied. No one had made a sound entering or leaving. I climbed into the bed because there was nowhere else to go, no other purpose to serve in this beautiful prison. The sheets were cool and smooth, the kind of quality you couldn't fake. The mattress seemed to mold perfectly to my body, and despite everything, the terror, the uncertainty, the fact that I'd witnessed a murder and been kidnapped by what was clearly a very dangerous man, exhaustion pulled me under like a tide. I didn't think I'd sleep. I was wrong. I woke to pale morning light, filtering through sheer curtains, and the smell of coffee. For one perfect, disoriented moment, I thought I'd dreamed everything. The gallery, the alley, the body, all of it just my overactive imagination fueled by too many crime podcasts. Then I saw the room, unfamiliar walls, unfamiliar furniture, and the cup of coffee sitting on the nightstand, steam still rising from its surface. Someone had been in here, while I slept, had stood beside this bed, close enough to touch me, and I hadn't heard a thing. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat up slowly, reaching for the coffee with hands that betrayed me by shaking. It was perfect, cream and 2 sugars, exactly how I took it, which meant someone knew, had asked, had paid attention to details about a witness they might very well have to kill. That frightened me more than almost anything else had. A soft knock on the door made me jump, sloshing coffee onto those pristine silk sheets. "Sophie," Mikhail's voice, muffled by wood but unmistakable. "Are you awake?" Was I? I looked down at the pajamas, pulled the robe tighter around myself. Yes. The lock disengaged. The door opened. He stood in the doorway wearing different clothes than last night. Charcoal slacks, a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows revealing tanned forearms, no tie. His dark hair was slightly damp, like he'd recently showered. Without the rain and darkness obscuring him, I could see him more clearly. Late 30s, maybe 40, with the kind of bone structure that would photograph well and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single sweep. Those eyes landed on me, assessed the spilled coffee on the sheets. "Irina will change those," he said simply. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize for being startled." He stepped into the room, and suddenly the generous space felt smaller, the air thinner. "We need to talk." My hands tightened around the coffee cup. "About what?" "About what happens next." He pulled one of the white leather chairs closer to the bed and sat, relaxed, as if we were having a normal conversation about normal things, as if he hadn't murdered someone less than 12 hours ago. "You saw something last night, something that creates a significant problem for me." I waited, barely breathing. "I have 3 options," he continued, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Kill you, keep you here indefinitely, or find a reason to trust that you'll remain silent about what you witnessed." "I'll stay silent," I said immediately. "I swear on anything you want. I won't tell anyone. I'll forget I ever saw." "You won't forget," he said it with absolute certainty. "People don't forget watching someone die. The image stays with you, surfaces at inconvenient moments, colors your dreams." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, those dark eyes locked on mine. "But that doesn't mean you'll talk. So tell me, Sophie Bennett, why should I believe you won't go to the police the moment I let you leave? I didn't have a good answer. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more inadequate than the last. He smiled slightly, but there was no warmth in it whatsoever. That's what I thought. Please, I whispered. I have classes, finals in 3 weeks. My roommates will notice I'm gone. People will ask questions. Your roommates received a text from your number this morning explaining you're staying with a friend you met at the gallery event, a potential networking opportunity that came up last minute. He stood, smoothing his shirt with long fingers. You're staying here until I decide what to do with you. Cooperate, and your time here will be comfortable. Fight me, and it won't be. Do you understand? I nodded, because what else could I do? He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame, looking back at me. One more thing. I met his eyes. Don't leave this room without explicit permission. The estate is large, the grounds are monitored, and my men have orders to restrain anyone wandering where they shouldn't be. I'd prefer not to have you frightened more than necessary. He paused. But I will if you force the issue. Then he was gone, the lock engaging with that same soft, final click. I sat in that beautiful bed in that beautiful prison, holding my perfect cup of coffee, and wondered how long I had before he chose option 1. 4 days passed in the gilded cage. Irina brought meals 3 times a day, elaborate affairs that suggested a professional chef somewhere in this massive house. Katia brought books when I asked for something to occupy my mind, appearing with novels and textbooks she must have had delivered, all in genres and subjects I'd mentioned enjoying. Victor stood outside my door at night. I could see his shadow under the gap, hear the occasional creak of leather as he shifted position. During the day, someone else took his place. I never saw who. I never saw Mikkel either. I should have been relieved. Instead, I was slowly losing my mind. The room was beautiful but suffocating. I'd memorized every grain in the wood floor, every brushstroke in the abstract painting above the fireplace, every thread in the curtains that let in light but no freedom. The windows opened exactly 3 inches. I'd tested, letting in air that smelled like pine and something floral I couldn't identify. Through the gap, I could see gardens, a stone fountain, the distant figures of men patrolling the perimeter. No escape. On the 4th night, I couldn't sleep. I'd tried, laid in bed for hours watching shadows shift across the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me, but my mind wouldn't quiet. What was happening with my classes? Had anyone actually believed that text? How long could Mikkel keep me here before someone started asking real questions that fake messages couldn't answer? And underneath all of it, the memory that wouldn't fade. The sound of that silenced gunshot, the way the body had fallen, those cold eyes deciding whether I lived or died. At 1 a.m, I gave up and went to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, staring at myself in the mirror. I looked terrible pale, with dark circles under my eyes despite having nothing to do but sleep. My auburn hair hung limp around my shoulders. I looked like exactly what I was, a prisoner. Anger flared in my chest, sudden and hot. I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd been running from chaos at the gallery and stumbled into something horrible by pure accident. And now I was being punished for it, locked away, isolated, treated like a problem instead of a person. The anger felt better than fear, cleaner somehow. I left the bathroom and tried the door, knowing it would be locked but needing to confirm I was still trapped. The handle didn't turn. My eyes fell on the phone by the bed. Press 1, Katia had said. I picked up the receiver and pressed the button before I could talk myself out of it. It rang once. Yes, a male voice I didn't recognize, rough with what might have been interrupted sleep. I need to speak to Mikkel. Silence, then, it's 1 a.m. I don't care. More silence, I could almost hear him weighing options. Hold. I waited, my heart pounding, half expecting Victor to come upstairs and physically put me back in bed like a misbehaving child. Instead, after what felt like an eternity, the line clicked. This should be interesting. Mikkel's voice, deeper than usual, rough with sleep. What's wrong? I need out of this room. No. I'm not asking for freedom, I said, gripping the phone tighter. I need to move, walk, see something other than these four walls, please." He was quiet for a long moment. I heard rustling, like he was sitting up. "You realize it's the middle of the night." "I can't sleep." "Take melatonin." "I'm not joking." My voice cracked despite my best effort to keep it steady. "I feel like I'm suffocating in here. Just let me walk the hallway with a guard. 10 minutes, please." Another pause, longer this time, then a sigh. "Stay there." The line went dead. I set the phone down, uncertain whether I'd won or made everything exponentially worse. 5 minutes crawled by, then 10. I was starting to think he'd gone back to sleep when I heard the lock disengage. The door opened. Mikkel stood there wearing black sweatpants and a gray t-shirt that clung to his shoulders and chest in ways that made me immediately look at the floor, my face burning. I'd seen men in casual clothes before, had dated, had roommates, had a life before this nightmare. But something about seeing him like this felt intimate in a way that made my skin prickle with awareness. He looked less like a crime boss and more like something dangerous that had just woken up and wasn't entirely pleased about it. 10 minutes, he said. Stay close to me. He walked down the hallway without waiting to see if I'd follow. I did, my bare feet silent on hardwood that gleamed even in the low lighting, keeping a careful distance between us. The house was different at night, darker, quieter, somehow larger, as if the shadows expanded to fill spaces the daylight kept contained. We passed closed doors, descended the floating staircase, crossed through rooms I'd only glimpsed during my arrival. He led me through a set of double doors into a space that made me stop in my tracks. The library was 2 stories tall, lined floor to ceiling with books. A wrought iron spiral staircase led to a second-floor balcony running the perimeter. Leather furniture clustered around a fireplace large enough to stand in. A desk near the windows, papers and a laptop scattered across its surface. It smelled like old paper and wood polish and something distinctly masculine, probably his cologne. "You read," Mikkel said, not a question. "Yes." I stepped inside, drawn to the shelves like gravity. "How did you?" "You've finished 4 books in 4 days." He moved to the fireplace and knelt, adding logs from a copper holder, striking a match. Flame caught and spread, casting dancing light across his features. "You can come here during the day if you want." I stared at him. "Really?" "With supervision," he added, standing and brushing his hands together. "Irina or Katia will bring you. You can read, use the desk if you need to study. Don't touch anything on the right side, those are my papers." "I don't understand." The words came out before I could stop them. "Why are you being nice?" He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "I'm not nice, Sophie, I'm practical. A comfortable prisoner is a cooperative prisoner, and you're going to be here for a while yet." "How long is a while?" "Until I'm certain you won't become a problem." "And if you're never certain?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then I suppose you'll be reading a lot of books." We stood there in the firelight, the rain starting up again outside, pattering against the windows. I should have been terrified. I was still a captive, still at the mercy of a man who killed people with the same casual efficiency most people used to order coffee. But in that moment, I was just tired. Tired of fear, of uncertainty, of being treated like an object instead of a person. "Can I ask you something?" I said quietly. He gestured for me to continue. "The man last night, the one you..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Had killed," Mikkel finished for me, his voice matter of fact. "Yes, what about him?" "What did he do?" "Why does it matter?" "Because I need to know if I'm being held prisoner by someone who kills innocent people or someone who kills people who deserve it." I met his eyes. "There's a difference." He studied me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, surprise maybe or respect or both. "He stole from me, then he lied about it, then he tried to have me killed when he thought I'd discovered the truth." He moved to one of the leather chairs and sat, gesturing to the one across from him. "He wasn't innocent, Sophie, but that doesn't make what I did legal or moral or right. It makes it necessary. Do you understand the distinction?" I sat, pulling my knees to my chest, the robe wrapping around me. I think so. Good. He leaned back, regarding me with those dark, assessing eyes. Your 10 minutes are up, incidentally, but you can stay a while longer if you'd like, on one condition. What condition? Tell me about yourself, something real, not your name or your major or the facts I can find in a background check. He tilted his head slightly. Tell me something true. I didn't know why I answered. Maybe because he'd given me access to this library, this small freedom. Maybe because sitting in the firelight made everything feel less dangerous somehow. Or maybe because I was just desperate for human connection after 4 days of isolation. I'm afraid of being ordinary, I said quietly. Of living a whole life and never mattering to anyone, never doing anything that leaves a mark. My parents are ordinary, good people, but ordinary. And I love them, but I'm terrified of becoming them, of waking up at 50 and realizing I never took any risks, never tried for anything beyond safe and comfortable. Mikkel was quiet for a moment. Then, and how's that working out for you so far? Despite everything, I laughed, a short, sharp sound that was half humor, half hysteria. Well, I definitely took a risk tonight. Several, actually, most of them unintentional. The best risks usually are. He stood, moving toward the door. Come on, I'll walk you back before Victor thinks something's happened to you and raises an alarm. We walked back through the quiet house, up the floating staircase, down the hallway to my room. He stopped at the door but didn't open it yet. Sophie, he said quietly. I looked up at him. Don't make me regret giving you this. He gestured toward the library we just left. I can take privileges away as easily as I grant them. I understand. He studied me for another moment, then opened the door. I stepped inside, turning back to face him. Mikkel. He paused, one hand still on the doorframe. Thank you, for the library. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. Get some sleep. The door closed, the lock engaged. But for the first time since arriving, I felt like I could breathe. The library became my sanctuary over the next week. Every morning after breakfast, Katia would arrive to escort me downstairs, stationing herself in a chair near the door with her own book while I lost myself in the shelves. Sometimes Irina would take her place, knitting something intricate while I studied at the desk. They never spoke unless I spoke first, but their presence was oddly comforting, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. Mikkel, however, remained a ghost. I'd hear his voice sometimes, drifting from other parts of the house, speaking rapid Russian on phone calls that sounded like business. Occasionally, I'd find evidence of his presence in the library, a coffee cup still warm on the desk, papers rearranged, a book left open on the arm of his chair. But he never appeared while I was there. I told myself I was relieved. I wasn't sure I believed it. On the 8th day, something changed. I woke to find clothes laid out on the chair beside my bed, not pajamas, but real clothes. Dark jeans that fit perfectly, a cream sweater in impossibly soft cashmere, undergarments still in packaging, even shoes. Everything in my size, everything expensive, everything chosen with careful attention to detail. A note sat on top, written in bold, slanting handwriting, "Wear these today. M." I stared at the clothes, my mind racing. This felt different from the pajamas, more permanent somehow, like he was acknowledging I'd be here long enough to need an actual wardrobe. I wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. I showered and dressed, catching my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The clothes transformed me, or maybe just reminded me of who I'd been before becoming a prisoner. The sweater brought out the amber in my hazel eyes. The jeans actually fit my curves properly instead of gaping at the waist like my old ones always did. I looked like someone who belonged in a house like this. That thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Katia arrived as usual, but instead of leading me to the library, she took me downstairs to a different wing entirely. We passed through a chef's kitchen that smelled like fresh bread and coffee, out through French doors onto a stone terrace that overlooked the gardens I'd only glimpsed from my window. "You can walk here," Katia said, gesturing to the paths winding through manicured flower beds and sculptured hedges. "Stay within sight of the house. Don't approach the perimeter walls. Victor will be watching. She nodded toward a figure standing near the fountain, unmistakably Victor's broad silhouette. I can go outside. I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Mikkel's orders, she smiled slightly. Don't make him regret it. She left me there, standing on the terrace with freedom stretching before me, limited, monitored, but still more than I'd had in over a week. I walked. The morning air was cool and clean, smelling of roses, and something citrusy I couldn't identify. The gardens were immaculate. Someone clearly spent hours maintaining them. I followed a path past flower beds in full bloom, around the fountain where Victor watched me with his usual impassive expression, toward a small gazebo tucked beneath a willow tree. I was sitting on the gazebo bench, face tilted toward the sun, when I heard footsteps on the path. You're up early. I jerked upright. Mikkel stood at the gazebo entrance, hands in the pockets of dark slacks, wearing a white shirt with the collar unbuttoned and sleeves rolled up. He looked different in daylight, less dangerous somehow, though I knew that was an illusion. The sun caught gold flecks in his dark eyes I hadn't noticed before. I couldn't sleep, I said, which was true. I'd been awake since 5, too anxious about what the new clothes meant to rest. Seems to be a pattern with you. He climbed the steps and sat on the bench opposite mine, stretching his long legs out, relaxed. Do you like the gardens? They're beautiful. Did you design them? My mother did, before she died. He said it casually, but something in his tone suggested the wound wasn't entirely healed. She said a man who surrounded himself only with concrete and steel would eventually become concrete and steel himself. She insisted on beauty, even here. She sounds wise. She was. He was quiet for a moment, studying me with that assessing gaze I was becoming familiar with. The clothes fit well. I looked down at the sweater, suddenly self-conscious. Thank you, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. You can't wear pajamas indefinitely. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've made a decision about your situation. My heart stopped. This was it. The moment he'd either let me go or tell me option 1 was back on the table. I'm listening, I managed. You're going to stay here for 6 months. 6 what? I stood up, the peaceful moment shattering. That's insane. I have a life, school, responsibilities. You have online classes that can be accessed from here. I've already had your laptop and materials retrieved from your apartment. He remained seated, infuriatingly calm. Your roommates think you've moved in with a boyfriend you met at the gallery. Your parents, he paused, pulling out his phone and reading from it, think you've been selected for an intensive research program that requires minimal outside contact. They received an official-looking letter yesterday. You can't just... I was shaking now, anger and fear warring in my chest. That's kidnapping, that's what this has been from the beginning, Sophie. He stood now, moving closer, his voice quiet but firm. I'm not pretending otherwise, but 6 months gives me time to ensure you won't talk, time to resolve some business matters that would be complicated by your testimony, and time to decide if I can trust you enough to let you go. And if you decide you can't, then we'll revisit the arrangement. He held my gaze. But I'm giving you a chance. 6 months of cooperation, of proving you can keep what you saw to yourself, and then freedom. Or you can fight me on this, make everything difficult, and discover that I can be much less accommodating than I've been so far. I wanted to scream, to cry, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But looking into those dark eyes, I saw he meant every word. This wasn't a negotiation. It was simply him informing me of reality. What do I have to do? I asked finally, my voice hollow. Live here, attend your classes online. Don't try to escape or contact anyone outside. In return, you'll have access to the house, the grounds, the library. You'll be treated well. And at the end of 6 months, if you've kept your word, you'll go home. And I'm just supposed to trust you. He smiled slightly, but there was something cold in it. You don't have to trust me, Sophie. You just have to accept that this is happening regardless of your feelings about it. He turned to leave, then paused at the gazebo steps. Oh, and one more thing. When Irina unpacks your laptop, you'll find some of my clothes in the dresser in your room. I work from home occasionally and sometimes I need to change. Don't touch them, don't borrow them, and certainly don't wear them. The specificity of that warning struck me as odd. Why would I wear your clothes? You wouldn't, he said firmly, because I'm telling you not to, clear. Crystal. Good. He descended the steps and walked back toward the house, leaving me alone in the gazebo with the reality of 6 more months crushing down on me. I sat back down on the bench and did something I hadn't done since the first night. I cried. The days began to blur into a routine. Mornings in the garden when weather permitted, afternoons in the library attending virtual classes or studying, evenings reading or staring at the walls of my room. Irina brought meals, Katia brought company occasionally, Victor provided silent security. Mikkel remained elusive. I'd see him sometimes, crossing the grounds in the early morning for what looked like runs, given the athletic clothes and the way his hair was damp with sweat when he returned. I'd hear him on the phone in his office down the hall, speaking Russian or sometimes English with the same quiet authority. Once, I'd passed him in the hallway, and he'd nodded acknowledgement before disappearing into another room, leaving me standing there feeling oddly dismissed. It was like being a ghost in someone else's life. 2 weeks into my 6-month sentence, I found the shirt. I'd been looking for a charger for my laptop. Mine had mysteriously stopped working, and Irina had mentioned Mikkel might have a compatible one in his room. She'd given me permission to check the top drawer of his dresser while he was out at some meeting. The dresser was in my room. When had that happened? I opened the top drawer carefully, feeling like an intruder despite having permission. The drawer was organized with almost military precision, watches in one section, cufflinks in another, and yes, a collection of chargers neatly wound and labeled. But tucked beneath the chargers was a shirt, black, soft, clearly expensive. I pulled it out without thinking and immediately understood why he'd warned me not to touch his clothes. It smelled like him, that masculine scent I'd noticed in the library, cedar and something darker, something that made my pulse quicken in ways I absolutely didn't want to examine. I should have put it back, should have taken the charger and left immediately. Instead, I held it for a moment too long, then folded it carefully and replaced it beneath the chargers, taking what I needed and leaving quickly. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how soft the fabric had been, how the scent had made me feel something other than fear or anger for the first time since arriving. It wasn't attraction, couldn't be attraction. That would be insane, some kind of Stockholm syndrome. But it was something, and that terrified me more than any threat he'd made. 3 days later, I did something monumentally stupid. I woke at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep again, my mind racing through everything I'd lost, everything I was missing. My roommates were probably worried despite the texts. My parents would be confused by the mysterious program. My professors had been informed of my research opportunity, but would surely notice eventually that something was wrong. I needed to feel something other than helpless, something other than controlled. I got out of bed and went to the dresser, opening the drawer where the shirt still lived beneath the chargers. I pulled it out, telling myself I just wanted to hold it again, just wanted something that smelled like freedom and power and choices I didn't have. But then I was putting it on. The shirt was enormous on me, hanging past my thighs like a dress, the shoulders drooping past where they should sit. But it was warm and soft and smelled like him, and for reasons I couldn't articulate, wearing it made me feel less like a prisoner. I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up, cocooning myself in fabric that didn't belong to me. I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke to someone standing beside my bed. My eyes flew open, heart hammering. Mikkel stood there, fully dressed despite the early hour, staring down at me with an expression I couldn't read. His eyes dropped to the shirt I was wearing, his shirt, and something dangerous flashed across his face. "I specifically told you not to wear my clothes," he said, his voice low and controlled in the way that was somehow more frightening than yelling. I sat up, pulling the covers with me. I couldn't sleep, "Take it off." "What?" "Take it off." Each word was measured, deliberate. "Now." My face burned. I'm not wearing anything underneath. Then get up, go to the bathroom, remove my shirt, put on your own clothes and bring it to me. He crossed his arms, settling in to wait. I'll stand here until you do. I scrambled out of bed, keeping the shirt pulled down as far as it would go, and hurried to the bathroom. My hands shook as I stripped off his shirt and pulled on my own pajamas from yesterday, still lying on the counter where I'd left them. When I emerged, he was standing in the exact same position. I handed him the shirt. He took it, his fingers brushing mine briefly. The first time he'd touched me since that night in the alley. His hand was warm, calloused. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I just needed. I don't care what you needed. He folded the shirt over his arm, his dark eyes boring into mine. I gave you one simple rule about my belongings. Keep your hands off them. This was your warning, Sophie. If I see you in my shirt again, there will be consequences. Do you understand? I nodded, unable to meet his gaze. Say it. I understand. Good. He turned toward the door, then paused, his back still to me. Why did you put it on? The question caught me off guard with its genuine curiosity. I could have lied, should have lied. Instead, I told the truth. Because it made me feel less alone. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, without turning around, find another way. The door closed behind him. I heard his footsteps recede down the hallway, heard a door open and close somewhere in the distance. I sat on the edge of the bed and touched my fingers to where his hand had brushed mine, still feeling the warmth of that brief contact. I was in so much trouble, and not the kind that involved bullets or threats. The kind that involved forgetting why I should be afraid of the man who held my life in his hands. The next morning, I woke to find a package on the chair beside my bed. Inside was a hoodie, soft, oversized, charcoal gray, with nothing to identify where it came from. No note, no explanation. But when I pulled it on and buried my face in the fabric, it didn't smell like him. It smelled like laundry detergent and something neutral and safe. It made me feel less alone. And somehow, that made everything so much worse. The hoodie became my armor. I wore it constantly over the next week, while studying in the library, walking the gardens, eating meals in my room. It was a tangible reminder that Mikkel could be something other than the cold, calculating man who decided my fate. That he could notice I was struggling and do something about it, even if he'd never acknowledge it out loud. I told myself that's all it was. Gratitude for a small kindness in an impossible situation. I was lying to myself, and some part of me knew it. The incident with the shirt created a shift between us, subtle but undeniable. Mikkel no longer avoided the library when I was there. He'd arrive in the late afternoon, positioning himself at the desk to work while I read in one of the leather chairs. And we'd exist in the same space for hours without speaking. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me, his expression thoughtful, before he'd look away and return to whatever documents demanded his attention. It should have felt uncomfortable. Instead, it felt oddly companionable, like we'd reached some unspoken understanding. That made me nervous, in ways I didn't want to examine. 3 weeks into my captivity, Irina appeared at breakfast with an unusual request. Mikkel would like you to join him for dinner tonight, she said, setting down a tray of fresh pastries that smelled like butter and cinnamon. In the formal dining room, 8 o'clock. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been struggling through an essay on post-war European literature. Why? He didn't say, but he asked me to tell you it's not optional. She smiled apologetically. I'll bring something appropriate for you to wear. After she left, I sat staring at my half-written essay, my mind racing. In 3 weeks, Mikkel and I had barely exchanged 100 words beyond basic pleasantries and his warnings about boundaries. Why would he suddenly want to have dinner together? Unless this was it, the moment he'd decided 6 months was too long, that option 1 was back on the table. My hands started shaking. The dress Irina brought that evening did nothing to calm my nerves. It was beautiful, deep emerald silk that hugged my curves before flowing to just above my knees, with a neckline that was elegant rather than revealing. Paired with heels that actually fit and made my legs look longer than they had any right to, I looked like someone who belonged at a formal dinner. I looked like someone who belonged in Mikkel's world. That thought made my stomach churn. At precisely 8 o'clock, Katia arrived to escort me downstairs. She led me through parts of the house I'd never seen. A formal living room with artwork that probably belonged in museums, a music room with a grand piano polished to a mirror shine, finally stopping at double doors carved with intricate patterns. "He's waiting inside," Katia said, squeezing my arm gently. "Relax, Sophie, it's just dinner." She left before I could ask her to stay. I took a deep breath and pushed open the doors. The dining room was stunning, a long table that could easily seat 20, but only 2 places set tonight, one at each end. Crystal glassware caught the light from a chandelier that cascaded from the vaulted ceiling. Candles flickered in silver holders. Windows along one wall overlooked the gardens, now lit by strategically placed lights that made the whole scene feel like something from a movie. Mikkel stood by the windows, hands in his pockets, wearing a dark suit that looked custom-tailored to his frame. He turned when I entered, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe appreciation, gone too quickly to name. "Sophie," he said, gesturing to the seat at the far end of the table. "Please sit." I crossed the room on unsteady legs and took the offered chair. A moment later, Irina appeared with the first course, some kind of soup that smelled like roasted vegetables and herbs. She poured wine for both of us and disappeared again. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the soft clink of spoons against porcelain. "You're probably wondering why I asked you here," Mikkel said finally. The thought crossed my mind. "I wanted to see how you're adjusting." He set down his spoon, regarding me with those dark, assessing eyes. 3 weeks is long enough to know if this arrangement is sustainable. And if it's not, then we make adjustments." He leaned back in his chair. "So tell me honestly, how are you managing?" I could have lied, given him whatever answer I thought he wanted to hear. But something about the way he asked, the genuine curiosity beneath the question, made me opt for truth. "Some days are better than others," I said carefully. "The library helps, the gardens help. Having my schoolwork gives me structure. But I'd be lying if I said this was easy. I'm homesick for a life I didn't even particularly like, which makes no sense, but there it is." He nodded slowly, something like understanding in his expression. "Humans are adaptable creatures, but we're not meant for captivity, even comfortable captivity." He paused while Irina appeared to clear the soup and bring the next course, perfectly seared fish with vegetables I couldn't name. "For what it's worth, you're handling it better than most would." Is that supposed to comfort me? No, it's supposed to be honest. He picked up his wine glass, studying the ruby liquid. "I don't enjoy keeping you here, Sophie, but I enjoy the alternative even less." The alternative being prison. The alternative being dead. He said it simply, without inflection. "What you witnessed wasn't just a business dispute. It was the culmination of months of careful planning to remove a threat to my organization. If word got out that there was a witness, that someone could place me at that scene, it would create complications I can't afford. So yes, I'm keeping you here. And yes, it's selfish, but it's also necessary." I set down my fork, my appetite gone. "Do you ever regret it, the things you do?" "Every day." The admission surprised me. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his gaze intense. "But regret doesn't change necessity. I didn't choose this life, Sophie. I inherited it from my father, who inherited it from his. And once you're in, there's no getting out. You either embrace what you are or you die fighting it." That's bleak. That's realistic. He returned his attention to his food. "But enough philosophy. Tell me about your classes. You're studying literature." The subject change was jarring, but I followed his lead. We spent the rest of dinner discussing books, arguing about whether contemporary fiction had lost something essential that the classics possessed, debating the merit of various authors. He was well-read, surprisingly so, with opinions that were thoughtful even when I disagreed with them. It was the most normal conversation I'd had in 3 weeks. It was also deeply unsettling because somewhere between the appetizer and dessert, I'd stopped seeing him as my captor and started seeing him as just Mikhail. Intelligent, complicated, damaged in ways I was only beginning to understand. That was dangerous. As Irina cleared the final course, Mikhail stood and moved to the windows, looking out at the lit gardens. "Walk with me," he said, not quite a question. "Outside. Unless you'd prefer to return to your room." I should have chosen my room, should have maintained whatever distance still existed between us. Instead, I stood and followed him through French doors onto a stone terrace, down steps into the gardens I'd walked 100 times in daylight, but never at night. The air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine and roses. My heels clicked on the stone path until we reached grass, where the sound softened to nothing. Mikhail walked beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, far enough that we weren't touching. "I need to tell you something," he said after we'd walked in silence for several minutes. "And I need you to understand I'm telling you this as an explanation, not an excuse." I waited, my heart rate picking up. "The man you saw me kill, his name was Dmitri. He worked for me for 7 years. I trusted him with sensitive information, with access to accounts and contacts that could destroy everything I've built." He stopped walking, turning to face me. "He betrayed that trust. Stole money, yes, but worse than that, he sold information to a rival organization. Information that got 3 of my men killed. Good men with families who depended on them." "Mikhail, let me finish." His voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't kill him because he stole money. I killed him because he caused the deaths of people under my protection. And I killed him publicly, where others could see, because in my world, mercy is interpreted as weakness. And weakness gets you killed." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked me if I regret the things I do." He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, completely at odds with what we'd been discussing. "And because I want you to understand that the man who holds you here isn't a monster, but he's not entirely human either. He's something in between, trying to survive in a world with rules you couldn't begin to imagine." His hand lingered near my face for a moment, before dropping back to his side. "I should get you back inside," he said. "It's getting cold." We walked back to the house in silence, but something had fundamentally shifted. He'd let me see behind the mask, shown me the reasoning behind the violence. Trusted me with context I hadn't asked for. At the door to my room, he paused. "Thank you for having dinner with me." Did I have a choice? He smiled slightly. "No, but you could have made it unpleasant. You chose not to." "Mikhail," I stopped, unsure what I wanted to say. "The hoodie, that was you, wasn't it?" "I don't know what you're talking about," but the corner of his mouth twitched. "Good night, Sophie." "Good night." I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. I was in so much trouble. The next morning, I woke with a reckless idea forming in my mind. It was stupid, probably dangerous, definitely going to get me in trouble. But 3 weeks of captivity had taught me that sometimes you had to create your own entertainment. And sometimes you had to push back against authority, just to remind yourself you still had agency. After breakfast, I went to the dresser where Mikhail's clothes still lived alongside my own. I pulled out the black shirt, the same one he'd caught me wearing before, and stared at it for a long moment. "If I see you in my shirt again, there will be consequences." I should have been afraid of those consequences. Instead, I was curious. What would he do? Yell, take away privileges, lock me in my room permanently? Or would he do something else entirely? Something that matched the intensity I'd seen in his eyes last night when he'd tucked my hair behind my ear. I pulled off my own shirt and slipped his on, buttoning it halfway, leaving it loose over my jeans. It still swallowed me, still smelled like cedar and something darker that made my pulse quicken. I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was down, slightly messy in a way that looked intentional. The shirt hung off one shoulder. I looked like exactly what I was pretending to be, someone comfortable in his space, claiming his belongings as my own. I looked like I was trying to provoke him. Because I was. I headed downstairs to the library, knowing he worked there most mornings. Katia was stationed in her usual chair near the door, and her eyes widened when she saw what I was wearing. "Sophie," she started, her voice concerned. "It's fine," I said with more confidence than I felt. I walked past her into the library. Mikkel was at the desk as expected, bent over a laptop, his dark hair falling forward over his forehead. He didn't look up when I entered, so absorbed in whatever he was working on that he didn't notice me at first. I settled into my usual chair with a book and waited. It took approximately 3 minutes. He looked up to reach for his coffee, and his eyes landed on me, specifically on what I was wearing. He went completely still. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken challenge. His expression was unreadable, but something dangerous flashed in his dark eyes. Anger, yes, but something else underneath it. Something that made my breath catch. He stood slowly, closing his laptop with deliberate care. He moved around the desk with predatory grace, each step measured and purposeful, until he stood directly in front of my chair. "Stand up," he said quietly. My heart hammered, but I met his gaze and stood. He reached out and fingered the collar of his shirt, his knuckles brushing against my collarbone. "I gave you a warning." "I remember. And yet here you are." His voice was dangerously soft. "Wearing my clothes in my library, deliberately disobeying a direct order." "Maybe I wanted to see what you do about it." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or respect for the audacity. He studied me for a long moment, his hand still at the collar of the shirt, his thumb now tracing along the fabric near my throat. "You're playing a very dangerous game, Sophie. Maybe I'm tired of being afraid." "You should be afraid." But his voice had dropped lower, intimate in a way that sent heat through my veins. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" "Probably not." He smiled then, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Take off my shirt." "No." The word hung between us like a thrown gauntlet. His eyes darkened, and he leaned in close enough that I could feel his breath against my ear. "Then I'll remove it myself." His hands went to the buttons, and I should have stopped him, should have backed away, but I was frozen in place as he slowly, methodically began unbuttoning the shirt. His fingers brushed against my skin with each button, sending electricity racing through my nervous system. He pushed the shirt off my shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. I was wearing a tank top underneath. I wasn't completely reckless, but the way he was looking at me made me feel exposed anyway. "You want consequences," he murmured, picking up the shirt from where it had fallen. "Fine, no library privileges for a week, no garden walks, meals in your room. And Sophie," his eyes locked on mine, "if you pull something like this again, I won't be as restrained. Do you understand?" "Yes," I whispered. "Good." He stepped back, putting distance between us, but his eyes never left mine. "Now go back to your room." I walked past him on shaking legs, past Katia, who looked both concerned and impressed, up the stairs to my room where I closed the door and leaned against it. My whole body was trembling, but not from fear. From something far more dangerous. I'd wanted to push him, to see what he'd do, to prove I still had some control over my situation. Instead, I discovered that the line between captor and something else entirely was far thinner than I'd thought. And I just stepped across it. The week of isolation was torture, but not for the reasons Mikkel probably intended. Without the library or gardens to occupy my time, I was left alone with my thoughts. And my thoughts kept circling back to those moments in the library. The way his fingers had brushed my skin, the heat in his eyes, the barely restrained control in his voice when he'd told me he wouldn't be as restrained next time. Next time, as if he expected there to be a next time. As if some part of him wanted there to be. I tried to focus on my schoolwork, but concentration was impossible. I'd read the same paragraph 5 times and still have no idea what it said. My mind kept drifting back to the way he'd looked at me, the way my body had responded to his proximity, the dangerous game we were playing that neither of us seemed able to stop. On the 3rd day, Irina brought lunch with an unexpected addition, a note folded beneath the plate. "Stop sulking, it doesn't suit you." I stared at the note, torn between irritation and something uncomfortably close to affection. How did he know I was sulking? Was he checking on me, having the guards report back? I flipped the note over and found a pen in my nightstand drawer. "I'm not sulking, I'm plotting revenge." I left it on the lunch tray when Irina collected it. The next morning, another note arrived with breakfast. I look forward to it, try to make it interesting. This was insane. I was trading notes with my captor like we were teenagers passing messages in class. But it was also the most engaged I'd felt in days, the monotony of isolation broken by these small exchanges. I wrote back, "You'll never see it coming." His response came at dinner, "I always see it coming, but I appreciate the confidence." By the 5th day, our notes had evolved beyond banter. "What are you reading?" his note asked. "Anna Karenina. Again. I've read it 4 times, but it feels different each time." Because you're different each time. We bring ourselves to every book. What we see depends on who we are when we're looking. I stared at that note for a long time, surprised by the insight, by the philosophy embedded in such a simple observation. This was the Mikkel from dinner, the one who could discuss literature and ideas, not just violence and consequences. I wrote back, "Is that why you have so many books, to meet different versions of yourself?" His response came the next morning. "I have books because when I was young, they were my only escape from a life I didn't choose. Now they remind me that other worlds exist, even if I can never live in them." The honesty of it stunned me. I sat with the note for hours, reading it over and over, trying to reconcile this vulnerable admission with the cold man who decided my fate 3 weeks ago. I wanted to respond with something equally honest, but I didn't know what to say. How did you comfort someone who just admitted they felt trapped in their own life when they were the one trapping you? Finally, I wrote, "Maybe that's why I loved them too. My life wasn't dangerous like yours, but it was small. Books made it bigger." I didn't expect a response. It felt too raw, too real for the game we'd been playing. But that evening, a final note arrived. "Your week is up tomorrow. Come to the library at 9. I want to show you something." I barely slept that night, anticipation and nervousness warring in my chest. What could he possibly want to show me? And why did the invitation feel less like an order and more like something he actually wanted to share? At precisely 9 o'clock the next morning, I made my way downstairs. The library doors were open, and Mikkel stood by the windows, his back to me, hands clasped behind him. He was dressed more casually than usual, dark jeans and a gray Henley that hugged his shoulders in ways that made it hard to focus. "Close the doors," he said without turning around. I did, my heart rate picking up. We'd never been truly alone together, not without guards nearby or the implicit presence of staff who could interrupt at any moment. He turned to face me, and I saw something I hadn't expected in his expression: uncertainty, as if he wasn't entirely sure this was a good idea, but was committed to following through anyway. "Come here," he said, gesturing to a section of wall near his desk that I'd never paid much attention to. I crossed the room, and he pressed something hidden in the wooden paneling. A section of wall swung inward, revealing a smaller room beyond, a hidden space I'd never known existed. "My father built this," Mikkel explained, stepping through the opening. "His private collection, things he didn't want displayed publicly." I followed him into a room perhaps a quarter the size of the main library, its walls lined with glass cases containing books that looked ancient and precious. But it wasn't the books that caught my attention. It was the paintings. They covered every available wall space between the bookcases, oils and watercolors, sketches and mixed media, depicting everything from abstract designs to hyperrealistic portraits. They were stunning, clearly done by someone with exceptional talent. "Did your father collect these?" I asked, moving closer to examine a particularly beautiful landscape. "No," Mikkel's voice was quiet behind me. "I painted them." I spun to face him. "You what?" "I paint." He said it simply, but I could see the vulnerability beneath the words, the risk he was taking by showing me this. Started when I was 12. It was the only thing that was truly mine in a life where everything else was predetermined. My father hated it, thought it made me weak. My mother encouraged it in secret. I turned back to the paintings, seeing them differently now. Each one was a window into a part of him I'd never imagined existed. The man behind the violence, the person he might have been in a different life. "They're beautiful," I whispered. "They're private." He moved to stand beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. "No one outside the family has ever seen them. Most of the family hasn't seen them. I'm showing you because—" He paused, and when he continued, his voice was rougher. "Because you asked me once why you should trust me. This is why. Because I'm trusting you with something I've never shared with anyone." I looked up at him, and the intensity in his dark eyes made my breath catch. This wasn't about the paintings. This was about something bigger, an offering, a bridge across the chasm between captor and captive. "Why?" I asked. "Why risk showing me this?" "Because somewhere in the past 3 weeks, you stopped being just a problem to manage." He turned to face me fully, and the space between us felt charged, dangerous. And that terrifies me more than any rival organization or business threat ever has. "Mikhail." "Don't." He took a step back, putting distance between us. "Don't say anything right now, just look at the paintings. Tell me what you see." So I did. I walked slowly around the room, examining each piece, and what I saw was longing for freedom, for beauty, for a life unburdened by violence and duty. I saw pain and hope and fierce intelligence trapped behind layers of necessity. I saw him. "I see someone who wants to be more than what he was born to be," I said finally. "Someone who knows he never will be, but paints anyway because the alternative is forgetting who he might have been." He was quiet for so long I thought I'd overstepped. Then, "Yes." The single word carried the weight of a confession. We stood there in that hidden room surrounded by his secret soul, and something fundamental shifted between us. He was no longer just my captor. I was no longer just his prisoner. We were two people trapped in impossible circumstances, recognizing something in each other that we'd both been trying to deny. "I should go," I said, even though leaving was the last thing I wanted to do. "You should," he agreed, but didn't move to open the door. "Mikhail, this thing between us doesn't exist," he finished firmly. "Can't exist. You understand that, right? Even if you weren't my prisoner, even if circumstances were different, my life has no room for this." "What is this exactly?" He smiled slightly, but it was sad. "Something dangerous, something that would put you at even more risk than you already are. So we're going to pretend this conversation never happened, that I never showed you this room, that we're exactly what we were 3 weeks ago." "And what were we 3 weeks ago?" "I was your captor. You were my prisoner. That's all we can afford to be." But the way he was looking at me contradicted every word. And the way my body was responding to that look made it clear that pretending was going to be impossible. "I'm leaving now," I said, forcing myself to move toward the door. "Sophie." I stopped but didn't turn around. "The shirt thing, don't do it again. I meant what I said about restraint." "What happens if I do?" "We both find out exactly how thin that restraint really is. And I promise you, neither of us is ready for that answer." I left without responding, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The next 2 weeks were an exercise in exquisite torture. Mikhail didn't avoid me anymore. Instead, he seemed to be everywhere I was. If I read in the library, he'd work at his desk. If I walked the gardens, I'd find him there too, ostensibly checking on the landscaping. We'd eat dinner together several times a week, conversations flowing easily between literature, philosophy, even politics. We didn't talk about the hidden room. We didn't acknowledge the tension that crackled between us every time we were in the same space. But it was there, constant and undeniable. I stopped counting the days until my 6-month sentence ended. Somewhere along the way, they'd stopped feeling like captivity and started feeling like something else, something I was afraid to name. That scared me more than anything that had happened, since I'd stumbled into that alley. One evening, about 5 weeks into my stay, everything came to a head. I'd been reading in my room when I heard raised voices downstairs, Mikhail and someone else, speaking rapid Russian that I couldn't follow but whose tone was unmistakably angry. Then footsteps on the stairs, heavy and quick, followed by Mikhail's voice. "Victor, my office, now." Silence fell. I shouldn't have been concerned. Whatever business Mikhail conducted was none of my affair, probably dangerous, definitely something I didn't want to be involved in. But something about those raised voices unsettled me. An hour passed, then 2. I tried to go back to my book but couldn't concentrate. Finally, around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway, just one person, walking slowly, stopping outside my door. A soft knock. "Sophie, are you awake?" Mikhail's voice, but something was wrong with it. It sounded tired, strained. I opened the door. He stood there still dressed but disheveled, his shirt untucked, his hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "I shouldn't be here," he said. "Then why are you?" "Because I've had a spectacularly terrible evening, and you're the only person in this house I can talk to who isn't on my payroll or afraid of me." He leaned against the doorframe. "Can I come in? Just for a few minutes. I promise I'll behave." I should have said no. Should have maintained boundaries that were already dangerously blurred. Instead, I stepped back and let him in. He walked to the window, looking out at the gardens lit by a half-moon, his hands in his pockets. "One of my oldest associates tried to have me killed tonight, someone I've known for 15 years. Victor intercepted the assassin before he reached me, but—" He trailed off, his shoulders tense. "It's a reminder that in my world, trust is a luxury I can't afford." "I'm sorry." "Are you?" He turned to look at me. "Because I'm the man keeping you prisoner. Why would you be sorry that someone tried to kill me?" "Because despite everything, I don't want you dead." The truth of it surprised me as much as it probably surprised him. "Because you showed me your paintings. Because you gave me that hoodie when you could have let me suffer. Because you're not the monster you pretend to be." He crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "I am exactly the monster I pretend to be, Sophie. Don't romanticize me because I paint and read books and occasionally show you kindness. I've killed people, ordered deaths, destroyed lives. The fact that I have a conscience doesn't change what I am." "Maybe not," I said quietly, "but it means you're not only what you are." His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb tracing along my cheekbone. "You shouldn't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're not afraid of me." "Maybe I'm not anymore." "Then you're a fool." But his hand didn't drop, and his eyes had darkened with something that made heat pool in my stomach. "Or maybe I am for coming here, for wanting—" He cut himself off, stepping back abruptly. "I should go." "Mikhail." "Good night, Sophie." He left quickly, the door closing behind him, leaving me standing alone in the middle of my room with my heart racing and my skin still tingling where he'd touched me. I pressed my fingers to my cheek, still feeling the warmth of his hand. I was falling for him, despite everything, the violence, the captivity, the impossible circumstances. I was falling for a man who'd built his life on darkness and claimed there was no room in it for light. And from the look in his eyes before he'd fled, he was falling too. Which meant we were both in danger, just not the kind either of us had anticipated. The next morning, I made a decision. I went to the dresser and pulled out his shirt, the black one that had started all of this. I put it on over nothing but my underwear, leaving it unbuttoned enough to be provocative, and I walked downstairs to the library where I knew he'd be working. Katia's eyes went wide when she saw me. "Sophie, don't." "It's fine," I said, even though it absolutely wasn't. I pushed open the library doors. Mikhail looked up from his laptop, and his entire body went still when he saw what I was wearing. Or rather, what I wasn't wearing beneath it. He stood slowly, his expression unreadable but his eyes burning with intensity. "I warned you," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I know. I told you there would be consequences. I'm counting on it. He moved around the desk, each step deliberate, until he stood directly in front of me. His hand went to the collar of the shirt, his knuckles brushing against my bare skin. Do you have any idea what you're doing? His voice was rough, strained. Choosing, I said simply. For the first time since I got here, I'm making a choice, and I'm choosing this, whatever this is. His control snapped. One moment he was standing apart from me, the next his mouth was on mine, his hands fisting in his shirt that I wore, pulling me against him. The kiss was fierce, consuming, full of weeks of denied tension and want. I kissed him back with equal desperation, my hands sliding into his hair, my body melting against his as he walked me backward until my back hit the bookshelf. Books tumbled around us, forgotten, irrelevant. This is insane, he muttered against my mouth, his hands sliding beneath the shirt to grip my waist. This can't happen. Then stop. He didn't stop. If anything, he deepened the kiss, his tongue sliding against mine, his body pinning me to the shelf with delicious pressure. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to mine. This changes everything, he said. I know. I still can't let you go. I know that too. And you're okay with that. I looked into his dark eyes and saw the same war raging that I felt in my own chest. The impossibility of this, the wrongness, but also the undeniable rightness of finally admitting what had been building between us. Ask me again in 6 months, I said. He smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed his face into something almost beautiful. You're wearing my shirt, he said. Yes. I told you not to. You did. Sophie, his hands tightened on my waist, if you wear my shirt again. What? I challenged. What will you do? His smile turned dangerous, promising. I'll make sure you never want to take it off. Then he kissed me again, and in that moment, I stopped counting days until freedom and started counting moments until I could be in his arms again. I was in love with my captor. And somehow, impossibly, he loved me back. We were both doomed, and I'd never felt more alive.